Welcome everybody to this December meeting of the Edinburgh Civic Forum. Delighted to see so many people here. We've got a pretty full agenda, as you know. So are there any formal apologies we need to record, Terry or DJ? No. Okay. So can we in that case go to the minutes of the last meeting, the end of August, and are people content with them as an accurate record of that meeting? Don't see any dissent.
Yeah.
So we'll take that. Matters arising. There's a couple of points that you may well come up anyway. I just wonder particularly in respect to David, to give him advance notice. There's David Givan. There's the couple of points early on about the organogram. I don't know whether that was actually circulated or not. Can anybody enlighten me on that?
Yes, David did send me a copy, and I did forward that kind of on to members. I'm sure that they'll recall. There was one or two comments of that, just to note that it was an organogram of the planning department. And I think what people subsequently came in asking for was if there was an organogram of the police directorate.
That's right.
To see all the different interlinking components. That would be kind of useful to see. So that's maybe something to take away if that exists.
Do you want to respond, David? I'll pick it up later.
We're actually going through some changes in the police directorate at the moment, so there's a little bit of reorganisation happening at what we call the tier 3 level. So that's the level we've got Paul Lawrence as the director, and then my boss is Peter Watton, and there are some changes that are happening in around my level at the moment. So it's probably best just kind of hanging fire on that until that's all in place, and that's likely to be quite imminently. So I'll take, if do you want to note that as an action, and we can see if we've got an up-to-date position to provide you in the early new year on that.
That would be excellent, David. Thanks. I'm sure people would be content with that. So the other thing on that, which say you may want to not take now, but in your more substantive presentation, is it's that same paragraph, I think, that about the outdoor seating, and that the various arrangements were to be removed by September unless circumstances changed. So I said, are you going to pick that up, or?
Well, we've obviously got live applications at the moment, so I can't comment on any of those. Although what I would say is that we do intend to take those applications that we do have to committee for its determination, rather than treating those as delegated items. So we're obviously looking very closely at the applications and what people are saying about them, including the Cockburn Association and community and community councils. So that those items will really come forward to committee. Obviously, in terms of where we were, I suppose in the summer, what we'd planned was that the structures would come away. We were thinking would come away at the end of September. We subsequently extended that for a period of a month up to the end of October, and we're asking for the structures to be removed. But then, of course, we've now received those applications, which we feel we need to assess from a planning perspective. Colleagues in roads are also looking at it from a roads perspective as well. And I should also make you aware we've had some further advice from the Chief Planner at the Scottish Government, who is indicating that planning authorities should continue to have the relaxed approach that the government had suggested we should have back in, I think, spring, summer of last year. They're saying that should continue up to the end of September of 2022. So that's a relaxed approach to planning enforcement in terms of installations that have arisen as a result of the COVID epidemic. So that is a is a matter for us for sort of general consideration. Although, as I say, I can't comment on those applications because they're live applications. But as I say, we will take those forward to the Development Management Subcommittee for its determination.
Everybody content with that? I can't see everybody on the screen. I think Doreen's got a question. Please unmute yourself.
I wanted to ask, we have one establishment which is applying to take over more public space, but it's coming through a revised application for approval for the building. And then there's just a reference to the extension of the public space. How will that be dealt with? Will that be referred to committee and dealt with as in a similar way?
Sorry, I don't know, without knowing the specifics of the case. So I don't know if you want to maybe email me, Doreen, yes, afterwards, and yes, I could have a look at that and see. Yes. Generally, and I know it's not been the case in all of these, when we think it's going to go towards a committee decision, we change the status to say that that's going to happen. So you can see that on the planning portal. So if it is going to be a committee decision, and we've already made that decision and we've recorded that in our system, we don't go back. We don't swap from being committee decision to delegated. It will never change. So if it says committee decision, that's what would happen. Yeah. If you email me the details of the case, I can have a wee look and see for you.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Doreen. Again, I haven't, because there's so many of us, I haven't to switch screens, but I'm not seeing anybody else with questions. So yeah, the other sort of matter arising that I think I spotted was about Doors Open Day, and whether DJ just wanted to give a brief report on that, because it was that the last meeting was just a couple of weeks before the event, or 3-4 weeks before the event.
Absolutely, I can give you a little update on that. We had our first ever, last 2020 was the first ever entirely digital. This year it was a digital and real world event, a hybrid event. So we had over 100 participating venues across Edinburgh and East Lothian. There was a few in East Lothian, mainly in Edinburgh. About half of those offered real world events. What the feedback we got from most people was that a lot of folk were still very nervous about going to venues. So if it had an outdoor element, it was very busy. If it was a smaller indoor, it was less so. But we got some wonderful feedback. People are clearly yearning to get back to some sort of normality, but they just weren't ready. So lots of wonderful digital resources were provided by every participating venue this year. So if you have a look at our website, go to the Doors Open Day section, you'll find all sorts of links to the individual venues across Edinburgh and East Lothian who produced films or video tours, or all manner of interesting things for you to do, or particularly in a dreary winter's night like tonight. So there's plenty there to have a look at, and there's lots of small venues who would really appreciate your support by liking their Facebook pages, having a look at their Twitter accounts, and having a look at the material that they produced, especially for people to enjoy their venues this year.
Okay, any questions to DJ? Again, I'm not seeing any. Any other matters arising from the minutes? Again, I'm not seeing anything. Apologies if I've missed somebody. In which case, I think we can move to the next item, which is David Givan's general planning update.
Okay, thanks very much, Cliff. A few things just to touch on. We're obviously going to hear from Lynne and Iain on City Plan and where we're at with that out for its period of representation at the moment. So that's really been the biggest planning news, I think, since we last met. The other thing to touch on, short-term lets. The consultation period ended at the start of November. So we've had quite a strong response on that. Lots of feedback from individuals across the city. We're digesting all of that at the moment. And as I said previously, we definitely hope to bring a report to committee on what we should do about a short-term let control area for the February Planning Committee. The other thing that's happened is the Scottish Government have published draft National Planning Framework 4. So officials are digesting that at the moment. Obviously quite a lot to get through there. For forum members, just to be aware that once National Planning Framework is adopted, and we expect that in around the summertime next year, gets adopted by government, that becomes part of the development plan. So it's a primary consideration for us in the determination of planning applications. So again, forum members may wish to comment on that directly to government. I think the consultation, and Iain will probably keep me right on this, I think it ends in March. Application numbers continue to remain high. In fact, I think just in the last couple of weeks there's a little bit of a spike, which might be a little bit of a pre-Christmas rush, but yeah, still receiving lots of planning applications right across the board, householder applications, applications for small businesses and so on. So that is keeping our teams extremely busy. We are in the process of recruiting some planning staff at the moment. So if you go onto our website, there's actually a rather good little video which kind of explains what we do and what it's like to work for the council. So that might be of some interest to you. And then the final thing I just wanted to touch on is that we've been doing quite a lot of work in around the background in relation to our planning reports, and really what we're calling kind of reforming our planning reports. So when you look at our delegated decisions over the course of the next few weeks, and then our committee reports from next year, you'll probably spot a bit of reorganizing how the reports are structured. What we're trying to do there is really simplify the reports, both for our officers in terms of preparing them, but importantly for the public and councillors in terms of how they read, and effectively making them easier to read, and then at the same time making sure that we comply with what the legislation says. So that's an ongoing programme of work that's happening in the background. But if you're looking at our decisions or planning reports, it should help you understand more clearly how we've come to the conclusions that we have. So yeah, that's a short update from me, but I don't know if there are any questions for me on any of that.
That's very much, David, very concise and clear. I'm again now just struggling to look along to see if anybody's got a hand up. I'm not seeing anybody with a hand up at the moment. Oh yeah, somebody was there, just a moment. Oh, it's gone. Sorry, if you had your hand up, can you just talk now? Because it's quite difficult on the screen with so many people to actually see who's got a hand up, but I thought I saw somebody with one up.
Mike Birch, if you want to go first, you get your hand up. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. David, could you just give us an update on the World Heritage Management Plan? I believe there was a report made to the Planning Committee recently, or
yeah, that's right. So there was a report to the Planning Committee on the 1st of December. So you'll be able to look at that if you go onto Council Committee papers online, and it sets out that we're in the process of updating the management plan, and it outlines the engagement around that, which is happening in around now and probably into early next year.
Yeah, I've read the report. There wasn't a great deal of detail. There were no results reported of the focus groups that had been held. I wasn't sure who'd been at those focus groups. There was also discussion about further community engagement in November and December, but we haven't heard anything through either to our Residents Association or to the Community Council. So I was wondering if you could provide any further information beyond what was reported.
Sorry, I don't know whether Iain would want to come in on that, but if not, I can certainly take that away. And if we've got any further information we can share at this point, I can drop you, probably drop Cockburn Association an email for circulation, if that's okay.
Does Iain want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. Yeah, we can have a discussion with our officer who's responsible for the for writing the management plan along with the WHS, and get a further update from her. The report was concise in terms of covering the engagement so far, but clearly there's a desire to see more detail of that, so we can speak to Jenny and get something to you along the lines that David mentioned. So yeah, we'll take that as an action.
Yeah, I mean, if there's time allowing at the next Civic Forum meeting, there's probably some interest generally about what's happening and what the level of community engagement is going to be.
Okay, I think we can note that for the minutes, and when the agenda is being prepared. So thanks, Mike, for that. Any other hands up at this point? Again, I look, DJ seems to be able to see better than I can. So
we've got Lewis McKenzie was next, and then Jennifer Marlborough. So if Lewis, if you want to unmute.
Is that me unmuted?
Yes, that's you.
Oh, hello. Yes, I'm not actually Lewis. That's my son. I'm Andrew McKenzie. I'm from Leaf Links Community Council. And to say, just wanted to say to David, that's really great that that sounds like there's an effort being made to simplify some of the council reportage and the texts of your written materials, and with regard to handling planning reports and what have you. I'm sure that would be very helpful for our community councils. Sometimes struggle with the screeds of stuff churned out by the city. And but I'm wondering also on a bit of neighbour notification and community council engagement. What steps? I understand there are some moves afoot to try and improve those issues, partly arising out of a problem that occurred down in Granton, whereby where there's a huge amount of housing development going on and mixed use, etc., but with local people not really knowing the changes and the variations. And I suppose a frustration is that I'm not kept in touch with variations on major. I'm just wondering what efforts the city might be able to make in that regard.
Yeah, that is, just being completely honest, it's something that we're looking at, and we will be programming that in for next year, in terms of hopefully early-ish next year, looking at whether we need to make any changes in around that. So when we get updated plans in respect of planning applications, is there anything more that we can do to make community councils aware of that? So we're looking closely at what the legislation says around that. And there's a balance to be struck between, making sure that communities are aware of what's happening, but not going so far as to sort of cause problems in terms of overstepping our reach in terms of the legislation. But it is on our to-do list, as it were. So it's something that I suspect that there'll be some changes to how we handle these kind of situations in the sort of relatively near future.
So again, it might be a matter for the March meeting to have an update.
Yeah.
I think Jennifer Marlborough now, please.
Yes, I've just got a couple of quite small things, but they're quite annoying. It's when new planning applications are coming through at the moment on the planning list, quite a few of them do not have named case officers. They either have Team 1 or Team 2. I wondered what the rationale was for this, because it's difficult enough to contact councillors at the moment because they have no phone contact. So previously we had email addresses for the case officer, which is very helpful.
Yeah, so this has arisen as a part of our kind of caseload management, and I outlined earlier that we've actually been receiving a very, very high volume of applications, more this year than we've ever had for quite a few number of years, which, to be honest, I suppose surprised us, because we thought, we're in a COVID epidemic, and therefore, there's maybe a bit of a downturn. But what we're finding is very high volumes of applications. So I think it's in around 2,000 householder applications compared to around normally 15 or 1600 per year. So quite a significant change. And what that's meant is that the teams that are dealing with those, all the officers in development management, what we were finding with some officers were just having too many live applications on their caseload, on their books at any one time, and it became quite difficult for them to be able to deal with those and to focus on those. And then the other thing that would happen is if a case officer went on sick leave or was on holiday leave or whatever, that those applications weren't progressing, and that could cause challenges. So what we took the decision to do was to pool the applications that were coming in, get them neighbour notified and publicised in the normal way. So for both our householder teams and our local development teams, those applications are being pooled into what we're calling, it's a kind of holding pen. And then once the neighbour notification period is over, we're then allocating to the officers at that point, and that means the officers can focus in on what have people said about the applications. They can go out and do the site visit, and then they can determine the applications quite soon thereafter. So in terms of getting the name of the case officer, if you've got any interest in, if you need to speak to them, you would need to wait until that application has been allocated to the officer. But if you want to make comments on the application, absolutely no problem in doing that. Just do that in the normal way on the planning portal.
Right, thanks for that. And the other issue that's major in our area in Leith is neighbour notifications, because so many of the new planning applications and the sites they're on don't have any neighbours. With one instance where only 3 were sent out for a huge development. One was to a vacant site and the other was to the name of a street that hadn't been built yet. And that's very frustrating for the community councils to try and get all of that information out to the local residents. I know previously they said the distance away from the development was sort of limited because of the cost, but it really means that there's lack on some of these sites of anybody getting to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we're in a bit of a legislative straitjacket. The legislation says that we must carry out neighbour notification in a certain way, 20 metres from the application site, and if to go, we can't go beyond that. That is what the legislation says. So I suppose what we're relying on is other measures like the weekly list, like the planning portal, and people can obviously set up notifications about applications in their own area and things like that to allow them to be aware. But it is a process that's set out by government. It's not set by ourselves in the council, so we have to follow what the government tells us on that front, I'm afraid.
So we could chase the government on that then.
Yeah.
It's just with such major developments, when you're talking about 200 and 300 and 400 apartments or whatever in these blocks, it's a lot if the neighbours aren't sort of made aware of it early enough, I think.
I suppose, I don't know if there is an action for me there, because I suppose I'm probably just need to be quite clear that I don't think there's very much we can do because of the strictures of legislation. But I suppose going back to that earlier point about how we're making community councils aware of applications and if there are any changes to applications, certainly we're looking at that. So there might be, arising out of that, there might be potential for us to make things a little bit easier. We did also, I think in the summertime last year, we did prepare a guide of how to use the planning portal. So there's maybe other measures that we can do just to try and help people who want to kind of participate within the development management process. So there's maybe some things we could do around that, but I could certainly take that away to have a wee think about. But so far as neighbour notification goes, it is a sort of legislative requirement, and therefore a little bit of a straitjacket, as I say.
Thank you.
Pierre?
Hello. Hi, David. I speak on behalf of the Central Community Council. As probably like a natural follow-up to what Jennifer and Andrew were saying in terms of applications and then notifications. At the moment, we are having lots of concerns about applications being lodged in LIS and then raising a certain amount of objections. Then these objections are recorded, and then let's say a few months later, a few weeks later, the application dramatically change, and then neighbors are not being made aware of these changes. And then the portal doesn't allow them, first of all, to be aware of these changes and not to comment on them. So the general feeling at the moment is like the council is moving the goalpost along with applications to potentially sometimes push them to up to complete success. So I don't know if that's these concerns are justified, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about it.
Well, on that front, I guess what I would hope is that if there is a substantive change to an application that that is going to affect neighbours, that they are re-notified. Now, sometimes what will happen is that neighbours will have said, or the public have made certain comments about an application, and the application is changed to respond to those comments. And in some instances, we haven't re-notified, because the re-notification is a kind of discretionary activity, so we can make a decision about whether or not we need to. But as part of that, earlier discussion in terms of what happens if we have a variation to a live planning application, that is something that is in the programme of work for us to have a look at. So, Pierre, I don't have a precise answer for you, but it is something that we'll look at. And certainly in terms of what I think the concern you're expressing there, that's something that we can take away as a point to consider.
I had like a simple suggestion, like for instance, people who object on the council portal will leave most of the time their email address. Yeah. And then even if there was a ping to say like a new document has been uploaded, I think people will feel already much more aware of the process. And it seemed like such an obvious move. Like you object to an objection, your details are lodged. If a new plan is uploaded that will supersede the previous one, I think an email would be really appreciated.
Yeah.
Like an automated email, basically.
Okay, I wouldn't like to comment on specifically what we'll do, because I don't know what that will be yet, but I think these are the kind of things that we kind of think about. And if there are things that we can do that they're easy, they're not resource intensive, then we'll certainly be thinking about those. I suppose what we want to do is, we want to make people as aware as possible, but we don't want to do it in such a way that becomes, unduly burdensome, and it becomes something that, slows the whole process down or devotes too much time from the staff. So, yeah, if I can take that away and have a wee think about it.
Okay, thank you. I have another comment now, in terms of applications. I will be honest with you, like at the moment where like you said, there are lots of applications being lodged online, and then obviously lots of people ask us to comment on them and or at least to relay their concerns if they have some. And then I've observed that some of these applications, my observation that they should have not passed some kind of the bar to basically be lodged, basically. Like the amount of information that is going with this application is quite low. Some of them are really poorly drawn. As you know, as I'm an architect, and I can tell when actually the drawings are made by somebody who is not really qualified for this work. And then, but the problem is like these applications that have been lodged very, very quickly still require our time, basically, because we don't want this application to, for some reason, to go through without being like assessed properly. So it feels like the bar could be raised a little bit to make sure that an application is validated once everything has been submitted, basically. So I'd like to hear what you.
Yeah, I think I share some of your concern around that. The requirements of an application are set out in legislation and in regulation, and the threshold is pretty, we think, is pretty low for what constitutes a planning application. And sometimes you know, we will be looking for additional information, and it can be very simple things like on a householder application, we might want to see what the neighbouring property looks like, where its windows are, and so on.
Basically,
so understand, is there an impact? Is it going to get overshadowed and things like that? But the legislation says we've got to accept the application without that information. And so then what happens is we receive the application, and then sometimes we'll be then going back to the applicant and saying, can you give us this additional information in order that we can make that assessment? So it can slow things down, it can add time to the process. And then the other thing that can happen is sometimes we're just, as you're saying, maybe the quality of the submission isn't quite where we would want it to be. So it is something that we're looking at. But again, being honest on that front, I don't think we're not going to be able to make, you know, a dramatic change in what is received. I think it's something that we will continue to work at with applicants and particularly with their agents about what, and really we would be framing that around the sort of concept of, if you can provide us with a fuller kind of suite of information, that will help us determine the application more quickly, and it will also help communities understand what those applications are all about. But as I say, I think it's unlikely that, given the kind of strictures of legislation, that we're going to see a step change in the sort of quality of information that is submitted.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, David from Safely Thwart.
Yeah, David, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Obviously, Leaf Thwart, we have this, you know, the tram. Seems to be some problem in getting really up-to-date plans on the layout of, you know, how the pavements are going down here, because there have been lots of issues, obviously, about widths of pavements and things, trees which are they going to stay or are they going to go? Now, plans have been promised for 6 months, and I do know at some meeting with community councils that some were whiz passed on the table, I think maybe in August to September. But it's obvious that there are much more up-to-date plans, because I found one on the street, you know, which a contractor had dropped, you know, and they're much more detailed than what you see on the website from Trams to Newhaven. Because there are issues, and these plans obviously are ready. You know, and I spoke to Chris Wilson the other day. I met him on the street, and you know, I said, well, you know, we've been waiting for these, and the plans that are sitting there was put up in July, and they're basically out of date, and they're obviously much newer, up-to-date plans. And I think everybody would like to see those, you know, so they can have at least some reaction to what is planned, because at the moment, you know, the contractors are going down, and we don't know what they're going to do. You know, they're already doing it, and you know, it looks like, you know, they're going to. And the problem is that things have been said and promised by council, by committees, and you know, because of the tram structure, you know, it goes through the contractors, then consultants, and it goes into subcontractors, and we still don't know, you know, what plans have the subcontractors got compared to what the management is saying. So it would be a great relief, I think, to a lot of people to see really up-to-date plans put on the portal, so that we can see what's actually going to happen. Now, that's my question. You know, if something could be done about it, you could chase the tram people, please. That would be great. If you have any comments.
So on this is an interesting one, because the Tram Act is written in such a way that planning has a very limited role in the process. So our ambit is confined. I was just actually looking at it there, confined to the consideration of substations, tram stops, and tram poles, and so the layouts of things like footways that are associated with or next to the tram line are not something that are under the ambit of planning control. So it's really those you know, matters that I outlined. So that means that we're getting what are known as prior approval applications, which are we are putting on our portal for those applications. but they may not have the full detail in them. So what I'll do is I'll take that away as an action to address with my colleagues on the tram team, and I also need to speak to colleagues within the planning team to find out to what extent the information on the portal shows what you're looking for. So yeah,
if you look at the plans which are there at the moment, basically the things have happened and there've obviously been changes, but basically they're vague. That's the problem. And so, and from the plan I found, which was lying on the street, they're very, very detailed, you understand? So these plans exist. So it would be really helpful if these plans could be actually put out properly so that we can have a proper look at them. And, you know, and this has been an ongoing thing for literally a year to say, could we have some decent, you know, images so we get a really good idea, because we don't get it, you know. And the way it's going, you know, the contractors will have done and dusted, and we don't know what they're going to do. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's a bit of a problem.
Yeah. So as I say, can I take that one away? Because as I say, our remit in planning is pretty limited. So I don't want to say, yeah, we're going to put all these drawings on the planning portal when actually that's not within our ambit to do.
If trams could put it on their portal,
yeah. Well,
yeah.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll take that away and I'll have a discussion with my colleague in the tram team and see what she's saying about that, and see whether there's anything further that we can do. And again, I'll respond back to Cockburn on that. Yeah,
but why I'm asking is because something could happen in front of me in January, and it's a very short notice. So the sooner they put these up, the better. You understand? So because I'm worried about something, and I'm worried until they literally do the job. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, because I think you've made the point. And Louis got his hand up, but I'm going to take John because Louis already had one bite of the cherry. So, John, can you be concise if possible, please? Because we are got a lot of other stuff to get through.
Okay, David, it's to do with we've been discussing in our neighbourhood in Craiglockhart the whole area of City 2030. And one of the things that keeps coming up with us, and I guess with other people as well, is the whole interface with the Scottish Government. That if we were to talk to the Scottish Government as Craiglockhart Community Council, it would be fairly meaningless, okay? Where you carry a little bit more clout than we do, shall we say. Now, two things I would give you in examples are the roads, where we're trying to, all to do with the 20-minute neighbourhood and the sense of place. So we would like to talk to the Scottish Government about roads and the whole idea of provision of crossways rather than pedestrian crossings, which are much more attractive to us, both in cost and numbers. And also the area of social housing, because if we're going to have a meaningful 20-minute neighbourhood, we need social housing. Now, I understand we're led to believe by the housing department that the limit of 190k on a social house is decided by government. Now, that means that probably most areas in Edinburgh cannot have social housing by definition. And so we want to have social housing in our area, but we're not allowed to, so to speak. And if we're going to have, if this 2030 is going to be meaningful, both in terms of place and in terms of road infrastructure to do with crossways, etc. I mean, a crossway costs £2,000 or £3,000. A pedestrian crossing costs £80,000. We'd much prefer to have 40 crossways in our area rather than one pedestrian crossing, because we see our area being carved up by roads. So we would like to have some way that we can come to you and say, we need to change this. Will you talk on our behalf, please? Because we're fairly impotent. You know, our intervention with Scottish Government is meaningless. Can you help?
Okay, so the basic question is, you know, can City of Edinburgh Council represent some of these views to Scottish Government? Can I take Lewis's question briefly? I want to wrap these two or three together and then we can move on. So, Lewis, you have had one shot. Can you again be brief, please?
I'm going to put it in the. I'm going to put it in the chat.
Sorry, we're not hearing you, Lewis. It says the bandwidth is low, so we're not hearing you.
Lewis, it might be better if you turn your camera off. Lewis, it might be better if you turn your camera off, and then try speaking. That's you, nice and clear now. You're lovely and clear.
Okay. Sorry about all that fuss. I was actually just going to say, to save time, I was going to put my question in the chat thread, but so I'll let you get on, Cliff.
Okay. Finally, Elspeth, I think, wants to raise something, and then we do move on. This is the last one.
I think Elspeth has actually put her question in the thread, which is.
She has, yeah. So maybe I read it out. Yeah. Can I ask David Givan why the number of delegated decisions has gone up very significantly in recent times? So there's two questions basically, David. One, although it raised some issues around City Plan 2030, I think it's a more general thing about the way that the City Council liaises with Scottish Government on planning matters. And then this one about the significant increase in delegated decisions.
Sorry, on the delegated decisions, the reason the number's gone up is because we're receiving lots more applications. So I think we're probably about 20% more than normal. So that probably is why that's happening. We are still taking the same kinds of numbers of applications to committee in the normal way. So I'm certainly not noticing any sort of particular drop in the number of committee decisions, but I think probably the simple answer is just that we've got more applications. And in terms of city plan, I'll probably ask Iain if he could maybe come in on that. About what was what was the question on?
Okay, well, let's leave it to the next bit.
Yeah.
Then.
And then I think the final thing for me, just on this point about us speaking to government, I think when we do speak to government and communities are highlighting concerns to us, we kind of feed that back through conversation, but we're not normally sort of in the business of you know, lobbying on government on specific issues. And you know, we are just one of 32 local authorities within Scotland. So you know, we're a small, maybe a bigger voice in a community council, but we're still a relatively small voice on that front. But yeah, we do feedback when we're hearing concerns as part of our normal conversation. Just on the 20-minute neighbourhood thing, obviously the roads within the council's area where they're not trunk roads are within the control of the council. So works that are getting done to roads are generally being done by the council. So it's a council rather than a Scottish Government thing. And then in terms of social housing, just to point out that, you know, we have got a requirement for 25% affordable housing, which is related to new development, so planning applications. And we're delivering, I think, in every council ward, affordable housing is being delivered. And obviously, I think, well, I think Iain and Lynne might touch on affordable housing in the presentation on City Plan. Okay,
that's very much then, David, and we'll move on to that. Just say, it is fascinating to hear that there is a significant increase in applications, which kind of rather contradicts the notion that these are desperate economic times for the city. But let's move on. Can I maybe just ask David from Save-Leith-Wart to mute himself, because once or twice, if you moved around, you're cutting in, David, on other people. So can you just, thank you. So now then, let's move to, thanks, David. Can we then move to the next item on the agenda, which is City Plan 2030, major issue for the city over the next decade. Is Iain going to lead, or is Lynne going to lead on this one?
Thanks, Cliff. I'll start off and Lynne will contribute. We'll swap presentational duties as we go through. So my name's Iain MacFarlane. I'm the Programme Director for City Plan 2030, so very much charged with delivering the plan, and Lynne is the Project Manager for City Plan, so heavily involved in ensuring that everything is followed through in terms of City Plan. And Lynne, I think you were going to share the presentation, which we'll send out afterwards in any case. Okay, so cast your mind back to January 2020. I know a lot's happened since then. And we had published choices for City Plan as the main issues report, as it's known technically, for the next local development plan. And that is very much the formal consultation stage and the key consultation stage for a local development plan. And what it does is really set out options for where we need to change the existing plan, where we need to bring in new policies, where we need to address different policy areas, and also very much where we need to find new land to develop and to allocate sites. It does have to, by law, present a preferred approach and reasonable alternatives to that preferred approach. And as you'll probably recall, we were very much putting forward a preferred approach that focused on brownfield land, that focused on key policy issues like raising the percentage of affordable housing. We can talk about that a bit more as we go through, and other key environmental areas in terms of sustainability. So there was a lot of big issues raised. And if we move on to the next slide, please, Lynn. We had a very significant response to the consultation. The previous main issues report for the previous LDP, we had something like 500 responses. With the social media and other media campaigns that we ran for choices, we had 1,800 responses, largely positive, not all by any means, but certainly a lot of the proposals and choices attracted support of around 70, 80, 90% of those responding on those issues. So I think there was a clear support for the approach we were taking. And that is something that gave us a lot of positivity going forward. Now, the plan isn't shaped in a vacuum. The plan is shaped in a national and a local policy context. David mentioned National Planning Framework 4, which was published a short time ago and is out for consultation. It needs to be approved by Parliament ultimately. But it was very encouraging for us in terms of its policy direction, very much about those themes of sustainability and environmental considerations, as well as tying in with the council's business plan and the council's strategies for making the city a more resilient and more sustainable place. Next slide, please, Lynn. And these themes, these key themes, you will recognise again from choices where we set out what the key things we want to make the city are. We want Edinburgh through the plan to be a sustainable city, supportive of well-being. We want it to be a city with much greater affordability in terms of homes. We want it to be a city that is one where you don't need to own a car to move around in, and we want to ensure that growth, continued growth of the city, is as inclusive as possible. So those themes carry through. I think if you've had a chance to really look at the plan, you'll see that that preferred approach from choices is something we've very much carried over to the proposed plan. And Lynne will take you through some of the key themes in a bit more detail.
Okay, thanks, Iain. So following on from what Iain said, we've got those 4 outcomes which are translated into 10 aims. So I'll run you through the 10 aims, and that sort of sets out the approach to city plan, how we've formed the strategy, and how we've developed the policies that go alongside that. So our first aim, it's about 20-minute neighbourhoods, a sort of popular theme at the moment. So really what we're looking at as 20-minute neighbourhoods is to have a strong place-based approach to the creation of communities and the sort of enrichment of communities as well. So looking at creating communities that are close together, linked by active travel, linked by a green and blue network, and places where people are more likely to live and work in the same place, reducing that need to travel. Our second aim, which is a lot of the aims are kind of linked together and they sort of follow through from each other, is to direct new development to and to maximise the use of brownfield land rather than greenfield land. So that's really about sort of how reimagining how we develop the city. In plans in the past, it's normal to allocate more land in the Greenbelt, for example, but with this plan, we really don't want to do that for a whole long list of reasons, but really it's about creating these communities as well as sustainability, etc. But this looks at, so our strategy looks at brownfield sites, but we also take into account some of the existing large sites that we're still developing. So still looking at developing new communities in Edinburgh waterfront and particularly in West Edinburgh as well. This sort of diagram here shows our approach to development and change. So the red areas sort of focusing on the sort of key sort of sites for development. So as you can see, the waterfront there in West Edinburgh, as well as various sort of diagrammatic blobs throughout the city, and looking at the city centre as well, continuing the southeast development area, and also sort of looking at how we deal with the bioquarter as well. The map also shows sort of high level, but public transport, for example, the proposed orbital bus, tram connections, etc. too. Our third aim is really, we want to guide development. We've got a series of tools to do this. So place policies and development principles, they're in the plan. We've got particular policies for some of the really key development sites, as well as a whole appendix of development principles that go along with every kind of allocation we've got in the plan. But also looking to prepare more detailed site briefs, and working with communities on local place plans as they develop in the future. Fourth aim is really looking at the sort of sustainability and net zero elements, which are another really important part of city plan and how we've developed the strategy and the policies. So as part of this, we want all new buildings to be net zero and address climate adaptation. So through their fabric, through their design, and through use of low carbon technology. But also, to supplement that, looking at how drainage is dealt with, as the effects of climate change, that's a really important thing as well. The fifth one, again, another sort of linked one, is looking at implementing environmental policies to deal with climate change adaptation and mitigation. So protecting our beautiful green setting that we have in the city, protecting our biodiversity, increasing our biodiversity, and looking at green spaces more generally, because this is, as we know at the moment, a really important for physical and mental well-being. But there's also other benefits of protecting and increasing green space, such as reduction in flooding and other climate impacts. Our sixth element, another really important thing for Edinburgh is addressing our affordable housing needs. It's a huge part of what housing is needed in the city. So as part of this, we're looking to increase the amount of affordable housing that's delivered alongside general development from 25%, which it is at the moment, through to 35%. Not all our affordable housing comes through this way, but a good amount of it comes through this sort of percentage delivered along with mainstream housing. Related to that is to protect the availability of the housing stock that we've got, as well as protecting the amenity of existing residents. So this is similar to the short-term lets consultation that's just finished. It's about looking at powers to regulate secondary letting, so Airbnbs, through planning, and requiring all land coming forward to deliver an element of housing. So where we've got a large site, for example, for student housing, that site should also be delivering an element of normal housing as well, if you like. And that's to ensure mixed communities, and also because land's so in demand in Edinburgh, and housing is one of our biggest demands, we need to make sure it addresses that. Our 8th aim is to adopt an infrastructure first approach. So this is linked to the brownfield strategy in the 20-minute neighbourhoods. So directing new development to where there is existing infrastructure. So that can be public transport infrastructure, but also community facilities as well. But we do recognise that in a lot of communities, the infrastructure we do have is really stretched. So particularly sort of school infrastructure, healthcare, etc. So the plan looks at where new infrastructure is required as well. And this is linked to aim 9, which is where we say that where new infrastructure is required, we want to take a consultative approach. So speaking to communities to address future requirements, education being a sort of prime example of that. Our 10th and final aim is to deliver Edinburgh's key economic land use needs, and supporting some of the key sites we have in the city, particularly the city centre, Edinburgh waterfront and Edinburgh Bywater, as well as our network of local and town centres, etc. I think it's really important that as part of the brownfield strategy, we're not talking about removing all elements of kind of employment uses to deliver solely housing development. We're looking to create mixed sites. So perhaps we've got commercial uses alongside housing on the, for example, the ground floor or the upper floor, but perhaps more mixed than that. It depends on the sites, but it's trying to make sure that we don't just take away all the employment. It's redelivered back as part of some of these sites and how sites sit together. But also the strategy recognises that a lot of the sites where we have economic uses in the city are questioning, are they fit for purpose anymore? We know from our studies that a lot of these are coming kind of to the end of their life, and could really sort of could do with repurposing to deliver sort of modern, sustainable business sites. Pass you back to Iain, who's going to go through the housing targets.
Thanks, Lynne. Thanks for that. Yeah, housing targets are maybe not the most fun part of the local development plan. Quite a technical subject, quite a dry subject, but very much something we have to address. And we were unable to do the normal thing of slotting in housing targets from a strategic development plan, because the most recent strategic development plan for the Edinburgh and South East area was rejected by Scottish ministers. So we've done a lot of work with the background data and information on housing need and demand, and set housing targets for city plan. We've done that throughout the choices process. More recently, those of you who are familiar with the process of getting to the national planning framework will be aware that the government consulted on default minimum land requirements for housing, and we have done some work on that, and we have in a sense tested our assumptions and thoughts about housing need and demand against the Scottish Government default minimum land figures. We've had input into that, and the draft national planning framework does show housing targets similar to what we're proposing in choices, in city plan now. So here you'll see a figure of close on 37,000. In that first column is what's known as the housing supply target, essentially a calculation of how many homes are needed to be or need to be provided in the plan period. And we have split that into the market and affordable elements, as you'll see there alongside that. In the second row, there's a generosity allowance. Now that relates to the requirement of Scottish planning policy to have a generous housing land supply, so that if some sites don't come forward to fulfil that nigh on 37,000 figure, then there will be other land available to come forward to fulfil that. So that sets what's known as the housing land requirement, which you'll see there at the bottom is just over 44,000 homes. And I think the figure in the draft national planning framework is 44,300 homes. So that is the amount of land we felt we needed to put in the plan to allow enough homes to come forward. And that includes to enable the council to meet its 20,000 affordable homes target by 2027. Now, if you add up all the sites and all the sites proposed for allocation in the plan, including existing allocations from the existing LDP and including permissions that have been granted since then, and including the sites we are proposing, then it comes to over 50,000. So we are providing a strong and positive housing land supply. And you'll see on the next slide, we've set out there. The sites in red are the new brownfield sites, effectively. The sites that are hatched are economic areas, which will be mixed use, as will many of the housing sites, particularly the larger ones. And the sites in pink are the existing sites we're carrying forward into the new plan. So there's a lot of sites there. You know, the brownfield strategy implies in many ways there will be a lot of sites, and there are some very large strategic sites also. For all of these, if we move on to the next slide, please, Lynn, we want to take an approach using place briefs to really guide how development will happen on them. And you'll see in the plan, there's a lot of sites that are covered by place principles, place policies, and they set out principles of development as to how those sites would be developed. And we'll take that through the planning process to make that formal guidance. So we're really looking to influence strongly how these sites are brought forward. And that relates to many of the other plan policies around density and around mixed use, etc. Move on, please, Lynn. This is an example of where we've taken a diagrammatic approach to a cluster of sites in Leith, Bonington, as to how they would be developed in terms of frontages and in terms of accessibility and active travel routes. So we're really starting to lay down, not necessarily how the buildings would be designed, but how the sites would be laid out, how they would interconnect. So you get that basis of place in terms of facades and frontages, streets, networks, that then architects can then design around. And the next slide covers West Edinburgh, which is an amalgamation of a number of sites being promoted for development, including what was previously known as the International Business Gateway at the south of the airport. So within there is also the Crosswinds site and the Syca factory site, which is on the market, providing potentially a significant extension to the city. And you'll see on that, as I say, we'll send the slides out, but this is published in the plan. You'll see we're setting out principles for green space, principles for connectivity, and how this could be developed as a mixed use area, a housing-led mixed use area that would provide new districts for the city. So huge amount of potential here to create a place which is connected, well connected to the city by the tram, although there will be a need very much for strong interventions in terms of enhanced bus public transport and in terms of active travel routes, both within the area to connect these sites up and how they connect to the city. If we move on to the next one, please, Lynne. So when we look at a plan, we need to figure out what we need to do in terms of providing for homes and jobs. We also need to then consider how we move around and how this development will affect that. And what we've done is to take the approach that the emphasis very much for sustainability has to be on enhancing public transport and enhancing the opportunities for active travel. So we are working with, well, there's a full transport assessment for the plan. That's one of the supporting documents you'll find online with it. And it very much takes that approach in terms of ensuring that rather than building more roads, which would evidence shows always fill with cars, and you don't solve congestion by building more roads because it encourages greater use. So we need to encourage people to travel in different ways, and active travel and public transport need the investment that will come from developer contributions to an extent, but also through Sustrans, who we work with closely, and through the council's programmes for the city mobility plan, as well as through development itself. So that infrastructure needs to be planned out, and you'll see in the plan the ways of doing that. It also applies to other areas other than transport, particularly on the next slide, Lynne, please. Education and healthcare. We've had appraisals done on those, and there's more work will be done as we take the plan forward. And we will be very much emphasising that whole principle that you find in many areas of Edinburgh, particularly historic areas, where there is a 20-minute neighbourhood, and we want to ensure we use development to stitch the city together more and provide more of those neighbourhoods for citizens. And that goes into the action programme, which again is one of the supporting documents to the plan that you'll find online, and we're working hard on that in terms of how we take that forward and the financial implications of that for the council as well as for developers. So there'll be more information flows through that as we go further through the process. And this map really just shows a schematic of the travel interventions that we would look to achieve. There's orbital bus, because development in the west would promote a much bigger market for that, which would then better serve a lot of communities that currently aren't particularly well served by public transport, and obviously enhanced tram going forward as well. And with that, I'll hand you back to Lynne, who will talk through the kind of what you need to do next in terms of making a representation to the plan.
Okay, thanks, Iain. So really, this just say obviously that the proposed plan, it's in period for representation. So the proposed plan, as we mentioned, starts the council's settled view on what the content of the plan should be. It has to follow a statutory formal process, and it's quite different from a normal consultation. The main sort of consultation for city plan was the choices consultation itself, which took place in 2020. The proposed plan stage and the period for representations, it's really about putting forward specific changes people want to see in the plan and the reasons for those changes. What we then do with the sort of suggested changes and reasons for change is we respond to them as a council, and then these comments and our response to them are then put forward to the Scottish Government reporter for consideration, and that forms the examination process, where the reporter will then sort of go through all these comments made or the representations made to the plan to determine if they think that changes should be made to the plan itself. It's not us going through the plan and saying we think this should change as such. In terms of the period for representations and promotion, Iain talked about how we promoted choices before. It's as a sort of slightly different stage. There's been a sort of slightly different focus on how we promote city plan, but there has been promotion on social media, adverts around the city, newsletter, blogs that's gone out, as well as sort of a statutory advert at the start of the process. In terms of notifying, we notified everyone who responded to the choices consultation and everyone on our mailing list as well, along with engaging with key agencies in the Scottish Government. And we've held various events over the period. We've got sort of 2 weeks left of the representation period at the moment. And we've held sort of 4 area focused events. Some of you might have been to these events, so sorry if it sort of duplicates some of what you heard there, but they sort of focused on specific areas of change within the plan. We've also held and are holding sort of public drop-in sessions where people can come along and ask any questions. We've got one tomorrow and then our final one on Saturday. And we've been conducting all events online as well due to the continuing situation. In terms of the period for representations and how to comment, it's a statutory 6-week period. So we started on Sunday the 7th of November and it runs through until Monday the 20th of December. So that's the end of the 20th of December. Representations can be made on the plan. Because it's a very specific stage in the plan, it's not just a sort of view gathering exercise, and it's about people commenting or supporting or objecting to parts of the plan, but specifying changes and why they think they should be made. We're directing people to make comments through the consultation hub, which is sort of council's sort of standard kind of tool that we use. The consultation that's been set up, the consultation hub that's been set up for the representation period effectively has all of the plan within it, as well as points to comment on it. It's not asking a different question at every stage. Every part of the plan can be commented on either through support, object or unsure, along with changes to be made and the reasons for those changes. I've got a few slides that just show kind of how the hub looks itself, if you've not already seen that. In terms of the proposed plan, I say that the consultation hub is laid out sort of in line with how city plan itself is set out. So it goes through the strategy, the policies, the proposals, etc. The proposed plan itself, we mentioned previously, it's also got a separate Appendix D, which contains all the design principles for specific sites, particularly where they don't have a specific place policy within the main body of the plan itself. The plan's also accompanied by a proposals map, which is available as an interactive map online, as well as we've got 4 PDFs of it. We've also got quite a number of background documents that support the plan. So they've been used to inform the plan and evaluate the plan. Documents such as the environmental report, which looks and evaluates the sites against different outcomes, sort of different environmental outcomes as well as heritage, etc. And also documents looking at the infrastructure requirements, education appraisal, housing appraisal, and so forth. Just these last few slides, these are just the hub. As it's a statutory consultation, you're asked to provide your name and your email address. Can't take anonymous comments on the plan. It then gives you a menu, which is what you can see in sort of step 2 here, with the different parts of the plan. And it's sort of, you go through, select which part you want to comment on from the plan. So select whether you support the section of the plan, select, for example, in this example, we've got a site, so you would select what particular site you're wanting to comment on. Then you would, at the bottom of that, say what changes you think should be made to the inclusion of that site and why. Then it asks you to return to the representations menu where you can submit comments or you can save and come back later. So that's really just a very quick run through of the hub, but I'm happy to answer any sort of further questions on that. But just to say the next steps in terms of timing for city plan. So preparing a local development plan, such as city plan, it's a lengthy process. We started this back in 2018 with a sort of consultation phase, pre-choices phase. We then ran the choices consultation. It says here we ran it for 8 weeks. I think we ran it for a bit longer in the end because of what was happening at the time. And now we're where we are just now. So it's got September 2021 there. That's when the proposed plan was agreed by the council and by planning committee, and then on to the representation period, which, as I say, commenced on the 7th of November. Following the close of the period for representations and on the 20th, we'll then be looking to consider all the representations made. As I say, we've got to write that response to them. It will then go back to planning committee for approval to submit the sort of package in response to that to the Scottish Government to begin the examination process. We'd hope that would be in sort of springtime, summertime this year. And then once the examination commence, we'll then finally adopt the plan. The examination process for the plan, it can be quite a lengthy process. I think it can take, well, in experience, it can take almost a year for that to take place and to go through all the responses. And we would expect to have the plan adopted in early 2023, all being well. That's all the slides I've got through. So thanks very much. I'll just try and stop sharing this as well. Here we go. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Iain and Lynne. Again, opportunity for questions. We've got Terry's hand up and Pierre's, I think. So maybe start with Terry.
Thank you, Cliff. That was a very helpful presentation, Iain, Lynne. And you covered quite a few of my comments, and it's really about the process of the next step, really for members of the forum to kind of understand what you've covered. As I understand it, what we're being asked to do is to consider the specific aspects of the plan rather than broad principles. You covered that. So if members of the forum wish to raise specific points, is it an aspect of needing to, dare I kind of say it, lodge an objection to a policy or a proposal or a plan in order for that to be considered by the council as an approach, or is it a slightly kind of softer kind of element to it?
You don't, the consultation hub itself does say, do you support or object or unsure? And it does then go on to say, if you object, please say why. But actually, we're happy to take comments if you support or you're unsure, and you partially support an element of it or just want to make a general comment. We can take all sorts of comments on individual parts of it. So it would really just be to complete it. You don't have to object to make a comment, is basically.
So just by way of an example of the policy you mentioned in terms of student housing and having a component of affordable housing tied to that, which is a really interesting idea. The threshold in the policy suggests a site area of 0.2 hectares or more when that policy comes into basis. So if if we thought that, well, instead of it being an area-based threshold, that it should be a numbers-based threshold. Obviously, that's something which we could kind of put in. I'm just thinking of how it gets landed for it gets reported.
I mean, you could say you support it because you support the principle, but you think that the actual means of doing it could change. So you could, I mean, it's up to yourself if you support or object. It doesn't matter so much as what you actually say about it. So really welcome comments like that on the plan. So if you feel that it should be sort of a more numbers-based thing, then suggest that it should be a numbers-based thing, and then say why. That would be very helpful. That would be exactly the sort of comment we'd be looking for.
Because I'm conscious when we saw the initial consultation, we didn't have the detailed policies. We were discussing those principles. That's really helpful. Thank you, Lynne.
I know the people got the hand up, but Peter Williamson was in quick with a type question about the forecast shortfall in affordable housing in 2030, given the aim that everyone can afford a home. Are 19,559 new affordable houses sufficient?
I'll approach that one. Yeah, the target of the 20,000 affordable homes is to 2027, and we have set up the plan to accommodate that, so they can be delivered in that period. But there will still be requirements for affordable housing that will continue after that. So 2027 till the end of the plan period, there will be further contributions towards the number of affordable homes. What you will find if you dig down into the evidence around affordable housing in the Housing Need and Demands Assessment 2, which is the most recent that has been through the full process. Housing Need and Demand Assessment 3 is in progress. But what you'll find in that is that of the overall housing need and demand, some 60% or so of that is affordable housing need. Not necessarily social rent, but affordable housing need of various tenures. So if you look at our figures of 44, well, the housing need is some 36,000 homes from that slide with the numbers on it. If you take 20,000 affordable homes as being delivered by 2027, then you can see that makes sense in terms of the overall need and demand and that 60% component. And then there will be further delivery after 2027. So housing forecasting is not an exact science, and many factors can affect how need and demand fluctuates. But certainly in terms of the council's commitment to those 20,000 affordable homes, the availability of or the allocation of land in the plan to allow for their delivery, the council's housing strategy, etc., then it's all built up to allow that to happen. And the numbers make sense in terms of that 60% split of housing need and demand being affordable housing. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. Can we go to Pierre? And with all the questions, can you keep them short and concise and questions, if possible, please, and we get the answers. So Pierre.
Thanks a lot for Lynne and Iain for the presentation. I have lots of comments that we'll make at some point in 2 weeks' time on the city plan. But something that basically stops me from having comments is the quality of the plans and the maps. Basically, I'm looking for large-scale versions of these maps online, and I can't find them, so I don't know where I could find them. Because if you go, there's quite a lot of them that are very hard to read, and I would like to know if there is a link to these maps, basically.
Is it sort of mapped within the plan itself?
Yes, mostly all of them. So some don't even have titles, to tell you the truth, and some are missing information on them. So I'd like to see where I could find the large-scale versions of them, so I can really look in detail what are the information.
Is it sort of site-specific ones?
All of them, because if you zoom on them, basically they are very pixelized. So it's very hard to get anything from these plans. Like I'm representing Leith Central Community Councils, and most of our interest is around Leith. And if I zoom on Leith, basically the maps are very, very loose, if you know what I mean. So do you have like bigger versions of them?
We have the online proposals map itself, which obviously can be zoomed in on, and the base map change, etc. But in terms of the place briefs themselves, not sure. They should be relatively clear in the plan, but
yeah, the place brief diagrams are created in a certain way in our PDFs, so there will be a limit to the resolution of those. If you zoom in through the interactive mapping of the proposals map, it certainly is very clear in terms of the sites and whatnot, but the PDFs of the place diagrams, like the two we had in the presentation, the one for Bonington and the one for West Edinburgh, I think they're probably limited to a degree in their resolution. That's maybe something we can take offline. And
these are okay, to tell you the truth. I'm just as an example, if you want later on tonight, if you want to go back to that plan, if you go page 10, for instance, the city plan spatial strategy, it's really hard to understand. Basically the lines are so thick, I don't know if I'm looking at what streets I'm looking at in terms of public transport proposals, but improvements. We will appreciate that if you go on page 10, for instance, the map, and that's just one of them, it's really hard to understand. So to comment on, basically, it makes it hard.
I mean, they are indicative to a fair extent. They're not meant to be precise drawings in terms of where the exact line where a transport proposal route would go necessarily. They are indicative, but point taken, we'll investigate that further with our technical mapping people and see if there's something more we can do with that.
Can I just ask whether the public exhibitions that you've still got a couple coming up, you say, will they have bigger maps? Is that one way to do, to Pierre's point, to go to one of the exhibitions rather than
they're virtual, so in terms of what we can present there, it's very much the materials you find on the website. So we'll need to look at that in terms of the issue that Pierre's raising.
Okay, thanks then. Jennifer?
Yes, I've just got a couple of things that can probably be answered very quickly. At the moment, and there doesn't seem to be a great deal in the plan about the development of more heat networks, which some of the current planning applications are using as an excuse for not sort of looking towards carbon neutral areas. And the other thing that has been mentioned briefly in the plan is about demolition of buildings rather than sort of rebuilding or restoring, which is much better for carbon neutral as well and posing emissions. And a third one is when you talk about 20-minute neighbourhoods and you're talking about green space, and when we only have in the planning applications coming in at the moment are high density, high rise with very little green space, some of which is plastic, which doesn't appear on the glossary for what they mean by green space. People are using plastic grass, which is not appropriate and was not approved at planning. So all of these things sort of link into the 20-minute neighbourhood. And they're suggesting having sort of retail or something in there, but we're losing our small industrial units here to planning applications. The new blocks don't have any actual community facilities. They just tend to be shops. And if you look at some of the things that have been developed on the continent, you've got new communities rather than neighbourhoods being built on areas the size we have in Leith that include a care home and a nursery and a church and a supermarket. That's what building communities is all about. So those are the three sort of areas. the mixed use as well, which is not being dealt with any of the planning applications we receive. They're nearly all just high blocks.
Thanks. I'll maybe start off on that. But if you give me a moment, I just need to let the dog out the room.
Well, maybe we take David's question as well then, and then David, do you want to put your question as well while Iain, we sort his dog out, but take David now. We can't hear you, David. We can't hear you. Okay, while you sort out your sound, Iain, do you want to take Jennifer's then?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'll start on the 20-minute neighbourhood, and Lynne may well want to come in on that as well. I think there's a number of really good points made there. It's not, well, I think the starting point is, you know, we can see a strong trend in terms of brownfield development in areas which probably you wouldn't describe as 20-minute neighbourhoods. And in many cases, what's developed is not always, but largely housing. And I think what was said on that point was very apposite. There's a wide range of uses that can be part of mixed use development. Depends on the scale of the site, depends on the street it's on, it depends on whether it's part of the core frontages, etc., of the area. But there's a great many uses that can be incorporated into the ground floor of developments or on a certain part of the site in developments. And that can include the commercial uses that are on some of the brownfield sites. Many of those are compatible with housing. It can include the type of uses that were mentioned. I mean, I think there is an example in Leith on Duke Street where there is a church, a modern church with housing above. There's no reason why things like that can't happen. Care homes, again, there's no reason why they're not necessarily compatible with housing. So we want to take a trend in terms of brownfield development and manage it better. So that is why we're taking the approach we're doing. You'll see in the plan there's policies around having reprovision of existing commercial spaces if sites are redeveloped. So compatible uses with housing could be re-provided for or provision made for new businesses. And we're talking about a range of employment. It's not just about creating a space for a shop, although that can be important in terms of a neighbourhood as well. So there's I think the question is a very good one, but this is a case of what we are seeing happening at the moment and what we want to do through City Plan in terms of policies to create better neighbourhoods where this kind of redevelopment is taking place, and indeed where we approach an area like the West, which is a much more of a blank canvas, and build new neighbourhoods there. So there's a lot there. Do you want to add to that, Lynne?
I've not got much to add to that. I was going to say I've got some comments on sort of the sustainability part of the question that might be helpful. In terms of sort of, we mentioned heat networks and embodied energy as well. What we'd say is that City Plan's got two new policies. It's got policy ENV7 on sustainable developments and policy ENV8 on new sustainable buildings. The policy ENV7 on sustainable developments, it requires developers to prepare an appraisal of how they've considered the building, which can involve, if they're replacing an existing building, they have to be accompanied by a carbon assessment, which looks at the sort of whole of life carbon footprint of the building versus reusing the new building. It's always a tricky one because in a lot of cases it can be good to reuse a new building, but it has to be considered on balance, what's the best thing, to replace it with a new efficient building or replace it or renovate an existing building. So there's a balance to be struck, and I think there's no sort of clear way for every building, but it is something we're considering and taking very seriously as part of the plan. And in terms of sort of heat networks, both those policies look at how a building is going to be heated and looking at that for that to be as sort of low carbon as possible. So that can include the use of heat networks. And I think within our aims, heat networks also come up through that as well as one of the key things. So it's not something we're ignoring. I think the other comment on heat networks is developers saying, I'm delivering a heat network, so I'm not going to do something else. The plan does ask many things of developers, and it's not a case that we're saying we want this delivered over this. They should be looking to deliver everything that they can as part of that.
But in the context of the comments from David given earlier on, that quite a lot of development proposals are coming forward, it would seem you're in quite a strong position to negotiate tough over these things. David from Safe Leith Walk, if you could hear me now? Yeah, go on.
Oh, good. Okay. I've been listening to it. It's all very interesting, and what I've my background is in arts. I spent many years.
Question, David, please. Not.
Oh, right. Well, what it is I'm having policy. There seems to be no policy on design of buildings, and why I'm asking this is because when you get down to the waterfront, which is going to be a massive area down there, there are, developments have already gone up and there are various, but the quality of the buildings on quite a number of them is actually very poor. So, and what seems to be happening is it's a bit like a checkerboard. A developer comes forward, I'll put this building here, it comes in with a design and it comes in one way. And then you get another building next door with a design. And what you're getting this very hodgepodge sort of planning thing, and basically leaves a very sort of unnatural environment where there's no sort of growth in the sense of community. And the buildings themselves in their design actually create and reinforce that. I mean, if you look at Leith itself in its history and its buildings, that's what gives it its character. So we're talking about community and community, but itself the aspect of a lot of the architecture is very, very poor. And I'm not quite understanding. Have this policy for 2030, and what I can't understand is why is this not being pushed more to the front? It's not. When we think about an environment, it's all right. It's about the clean water. It's about about the health. But it's also about our psychic environment around us. And, there are some very poor buildings gone up opposite the ocean terminal, for example. I mean, they're like blocks. I mean, these are, they remind me of something which was put up in New York in the 1960s and 1970s, which had to be blown up. So, where is in this policy this, an idea about an aesthetic environment where people can actually feel that they belong to their community? And this is I can see this is a major problem. And everybody's talked about plans, positions, technicalities, but what about how you actually exist in that place? And I would like to see, I'd be a lot happy to see a bit more talk about this in this plan. That's more my point. Yeah. And all right, that's it.
Iain or Lynne, do you want to pick up that?
Thanks. I mean, certainly there are design policies in the plan. If you feel they should be strengthened, then there's aspects of that we can do. But there's also a lot of the design aspects that are covered by our Edinburgh Design Guidance, and that will be reviewed in line with the plan. So there is a kind of structure and a process in terms of how we do that. And I understand the point. I think I find this discussion really, really interesting in the sense that there's a lot of historic housing stock, which people would say is fine and nice, but actually, if you look closely, it's not that nice. It just happens to be built of stone, and people feel that it's nice. And I totally agree that the psychological aspects of how a place is built are really important. But the first and foremost part of that, I would say, is about the spaces and the connectivity and how you can move around it and how easy it is to use and how many things are there that you need. That's the fundamental of it. And then how you design the buildings and their appearance is almost the next part of that. And it is really important because you do want to feel part of the place in terms of what you're seeing. But in some ways, different people have different opinions about that are quite difficult to rationalize together. You know, some people really like modern architecture and think we should build for the place we are now, the time we are in. Some people think that everything should be designed like it was old, even though it's not. And, you know, that's a debate that could go on forever. I think it's important to recognize that, you know, I presume the references to the flats that are being built opposite Ocean Terminal. And to me, you know, they are a reinterpretation of the tenement in many ways. And there's also colonies down there. So there's, you know, we're updating, or, you know, in partnership, if you like, with the development industry, we're updating the forms that are traditional to Edinburgh. I think over time, people recognize that, but when it's first there, they find it very difficult sometimes to assimilate that. But there are design policies in the plan. The Edinburgh Design Guidance is a big publication, and we will review that going forward with the plan.
Thanks. And I just want now to wrap up. There's three questions come in. I'm going to roll them into one, and then we'll move on because we've still got the reports from the different neighbourhoods. So there's a question about, will a new plan include more control over where affordable housing can be provided? So it's asking for more specific detail about the location of affordable housing, and that also links in possibly with how the plans relate to local place plans, again, which we'd expect at a local level. And I think that the other question, which is from John Corbett, I think they're both from Mike Birch. John Corbett asking whether it'd be better to focus, again, at a more micro scale, the community council areas of around 10,000 people rather than wards of 50,000. So it's really, I think, saying, you know, is there within the strategy and the overview of the city and the place-based elements, is there still some way to go to really be very specific at a very local level, whether for affordable housing or other inputs?
Okay. In terms of affordable housing locations and where it's developed, I think there's two main things. One is that every market site requires to provide 25% affordable housing. So there's a mix there in terms of who would be living there. But equally, the council's own housing strategy would see sites developed not just for affordable homes from the council, but also in many instances with private housing. So just as we require affordable housing from the market to ensure that new developments are mixed communities, it's important through our housing strategy to ensure that, particularly on larger sites, you would split the sites in terms of numbers between the council development, if you like, and an element of market development or homes built for sale, because that is a better financial balance for the council, but it's also a much better way of creating mixed communities. So we want to see that on both, if you like, council-owned sites or council-acquired sites, as well as on market sites, and you would get mixed communities on each, and that should be happening. You know, there's I can't remember the number of sites that housing are working on at the moment, but I think it's in the 20s. You know, 20 odd sites are being built for affordable housing at the moment. with different mixes on each site. And there's a lot more planned. The housing published a new strategic housing investment plan just a few weeks ago that was approved at committee, and that details where they are able to say, you know, sites that they own or are acquiring, but also as the kind of financial side of it as well. So there's a whole lot of information out there about the existing affordable housing programme, and they'll, you know, they will look to build wherever they can in terms of acquiring sites. There's a significant investment from the council in that. In terms of local place plans, the regulations for those, I think, will be through the excuse me, it's been a long day, parliamentary process by the end of the year, I think. And we're keen to understand from all areas which groups might want to pursue them, and also what they might want to pursue, because I suspect there'll be a huge range across the city. There'll be some areas that may want to restrict development. There'll be some areas that may want to promote development. And it'd be really, really positive and useful to understand the range of views on that. You know, we're entirely supportive of the process. I think if people need resource help, then that is probably a bit of an issue for the council at the moment, because our resources are very tight. But certainly choices and city plan are very supportive of how they work, and they, you know, they do need to comply with the local development plan, or at least have due regard to it, as well as the local development plan in time having due regard to those local place plans. So it's a process we need to work on together.
Okay.
In terms of the size of community council areas, I'm not sure I'm really qualified to talk to that. There may be some legislative requirements that are around that, but we can investigate that with colleagues who are qualified.
I think it comes back to some extent to the local place plans and what level, you know, things are done at. But
yeah, I mean, they can be,
because otherwise we're going to run short. I'm sorry to cut you off, Iain, and thanks to Iain and Lynne for what you've done. But otherwise, we you know, we've still got other items. I think the real message of this is that this is now a really important stage these next 2 weeks, and the devil's in the detail. You need, everybody I think needs to look at the policies and really consider the precise wording and whether you want changes in that wording. And I think that reflects some of the things that's come up. And then in the new year, we're likely to be into discussion about local place plans, but they're going to fit into this framework that will eventually emerge, as Lynne clearly explained, once the thing is probably out in 2023. Having been adopted and submitted to Scottish Government. So thanks everybody. I'm sorry to cut off, but it is 10 to 8 just gone, I think. So can we move to the next item, which is the reports from the different groups? I think we got the Association Community Councils first. Is Simon doing that? I'm not sure.
Yes, I am. I will try and switch on the sharing.
Yep. And if I could just ask, given time for because the three brevity and preciseness would be appreciated.
You'll be very happy to know, Terry, that this is a mini presentation of 3 slides. Okay, I am Simon Hollidge. I'm the Secretary of the Edinburgh Association of Community Councils, and I think I know quite a number of you already. I'm also a member of the Newtown and Broughton Community Council. Thought I'd start off with a map. We we have, I should say, 46 community council areas in Edinburgh, of which 44 are constituted. The 2 black areas are areas which don't have community councils. I think I'm personally in contact, I worked it out, with about 36 community councils. We've just had an AGM where 19 community councils joined in, and were very keen to engage and work with all the all the community councils. One of our, I don't know whether you can see that, see the slide. Is it? I don't know whether it's gone over the edge. One of our main functions of the community council is to represent all the community councils, what has been called the community of place on the Edinburgh Partnership. And the Edinburgh Partnership is the community planning partnership for the whole city, which brings together not just the council, the community, the council itself, the Edinburgh Association of Community Councils, but also the health bodies, NHS, Lothian, the police, and the fire service, the university, and various other bodies. So it's a kind of overarching body which is responsible for the organization of the city. And at the moment, in connection with the sort of under the Edinburgh Partnership, we are working a group of senior council officers and a steering group of the Edinburgh Association of Community Councils are working on a bilateral improvement plan. And what we're doing at the moment actually ties in with the last things that Iain was talking about. What we're, first of all, there are 5 main points that we're working on at the moment. And the first one is just improving the relationship and particularly communications. What we're particularly keen on is to have a dedicated unit in the council which served the community councils and help smooth communications. At the moment, I think many of you know that we tend to use the councillors, the city councillors, in order to communicate with city officers. This is arguably not a wonderful use of their time. And it would be better if we can, if possible, have efficient, direct communications. The second thing is to have a support review to look at the ways in which EACC can provide a fuller, more complete service to the community councils. And also one of the things which has come up is to look at compensation arrangements for community councillors in order that we can attract more young people and more diverse selection of community councillors. Small financial compensatory arrangements. So that's the number 2. The third one, which is, and it is actually a sequence, is to review the scheme. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the scheme, but the scheme is a set of arrangements which is been worked out by the governance section, by the council governance section, to give a framework for how the community councils operate. So, we would have a review of the scheme, and this is necessary in order to look at a boundary review. At the moment, as I think many of us know, the community council sizes are very unequal, and they're very unequal, and the boundaries tend to be anomalous. They tend to be historic. My own community council, which is the New Town, is in 3 different localities. It's 3 city wards, and this obviously creates some anomalies and problems. So the boundary review would then hopefully take place. And then finally, what we are talking about is having the next elections for the community councils in May 2024, after the scheme review and the boundary review. And one of the reasons for holding the elections in May rather than in the autumn is to bring them in line with the council elections, so that people think more in terms of real active elections, which would take place each time in May. That's all. That's really all I have to say. And I hope, Terry, I haven't overshot my space.
Thanks very much, Simon. And I'm sure if people wish to follow up, they can contact you, and I'm sure you'd be very helpful. That sounds a set of good ideas. So can we now go on to the report from the Grassmarket? I think it is the next one. Yeah.
Great. I'll try and keep it really short. We wrote to Terry in despair after our last meeting, and whereas I think we support a lot of the development plan in principle, if you do a word search, you only come across the word tourism 3 times. Basically, why we despaired at our last meeting is quite simply, there's no community here. I don't know if we're being considered as one of the 20-minute neighborhoods. There's certain elements of that we certainly fit with, but we have no community. It's gone. So what do we do about it? I mean, we're faced in recent months with a mushrooming of late night hot food takeaways, which are replacing the essential shops in the area. The west end of the Grassmarket, well, actually the Grassmarket in total, is becoming a sex haven. I don't know if we have any Sun readers here, but there is a woman earning £2,000 a month having sex with her partner in Greyfriars Churchyard, among other unusual places, and then passing he videos this exciting event, and they put the video on various dodgy websites and people pay to look at them. We're faced with, and this is, I think, really highlights our problem. We're a very small community. We don't have the expertise of Newtown and Broughton, for example. Our local councillor admitted that we were the smallest community council, but we had the heaviest workload. So it's objecting to timber structures, taking permanent space. What's the point of transformation strategies if pubs and restaurants are clattering up pavements with permanent structures because the council hasn't been tough enough to say, no, this has got to go. I mean, the Grassmarket pubs are now humming with young people. I think what brought it to the head was an application by a company called Foreplay Crazy Golf for a large retail outlet in the Grassmarket. The idea being you play a game of crazy golf and then you go and get drunk on the premises. So how do we stop this? That's my question. And our 20-minute neighborhoods, of which I don't think we're being considered, I just feel the city centre, particularly the Old Town, has just been abandoned to tourism. We were told time and time again it was going to be real different after COVID. There's absolutely no sign of it. Now I will shut up because I'm conscious people are probably desperate for a cup of tea, and hand over to Wendy.
Hi, it's my turn. It's difficult to know where to start to take that up. One of the problems we've had is that in the licensing strategy, it's quite clear about over provision, and that we're very much in an area of over provision for licenses. But that has made absolutely no difference. And we've had a whole cluster of new licenses, which actually start with planning, because for an example, one of the hostels at the Cowgate Head started with getting permission for a bar within the hostel because it was ancillary to the main use. Then COVID came, they created an outside bar in a piece of wasteland behind it. Then they managed to get a license for that, they managed to get permission for that, and now they have within the premises a full-blown pub. So it's gone from a backpackers hostel, very well run and all the rest of it, to this at the Cowgate Head, effectively 2 new licenses. There was also the Cowshed, some derelict property underneath the arches that was opened up. Now that started for 1 month during the festival. It's now a permanent large pub. Then the Virgin Hotels, their building is being constructed, 9-story hotel right at that point. They are going to, because they're a hotel, they'll be allowed to have as many bars as they like. And they have premises that will open onto the Cowgate. So, and meantime, also, all the traffic that gets diverted and all these streets are being closed are being rerouted through the Westport, the Grass Market, and through the Cowgate, which actually reaches gridlock at times. So, and of course, nobody can see that. If you're walking the streets of Edinburgh, you think it's nice because you can walk everywhere. So this is just a sort of snapshot of what's happening. My own view is that the council's completely missing a trick. Glasgow isn't. Glasgow is talking about bringing back people into the city centre, recognising there are going to be fewer people perhaps in the office buildings, not knowing that the future for instance, student housing, where the students go more online, can see, and a retail that has been badly hit by online deliveries, that if you want a low carbon future, you encourage people to live in dense places, which, the old town and the new town are. So, we feel very frustrated because we have a vision of how it could be. And yet, I mean, we respond to absolutely everything, every consultation between us, we put in responses, and I consider quite well worded ones, and it actually makes not a blind bit of difference. So, we need to be recognized as a residential area. That is a sort of crucial thing. And everything really comes from that, respect over this business of our convenience store having sex dolls in its window. We need that kind of respect, and we're not getting it at the moment. So, we've been talking about it for a long time. I'm interested in this business of place plans. I don't think it's going, are place plans going to make any difference? We will draw up a place plan. We will submit it if you say it's actually going to make a difference. So this is where we're coming from. So we need the council to actually wake up and realise that they're kind of wasting the city at the moment.
Okay, very moving stories there, and real concern and sense of lack of capacity, lack of power to influence things. And maybe we can't possibly go into it all at this stage of the evening. I'm sure people appreciate that, but I think it's very important that these messages are heard, and it's perhaps something we can return to in the new year. I am going to have to move on, although there's Peter and got his hand up, but we're already 8 minutes over the scheduled time. Can we just take what is another heartfelt issue from the terraces about bin collections and waste management? I'm not sure who's doing that one.
It's me, Cliff. Thank you. I will keep this quick because obviously I recognise that we've been on the call for a long time. I think the first thing to say is that, as a community, we recognise that there are ways in which recycling and waste reduction should be taking place, but we feel that the way in which the council is approaching this will not deliver what they are trying to achieve. And indeed, will inflict a lot of damage on the streetscape. The media have focused on the loss of goal-proof bags, but it goes much further than that. And although most of the streets that are affected by the loss of the goal-proof bags are in the new town area, this does affect residents living in Stockbridge and Inverleith, West End, and indeed to a small extent in the Old Town. The decision that was taken by the Transport and Environment Committee meeting on the 22nd of April was made without any prior consultation with any of the community councils, with any of the heritage bodies, or indeed residents. This plan change will see the removal of curbside collection of waste and recycling and the introduction of communal hubs with up to 6 large bins every 50 to 100 metres across the city centre. The current arrangements were introduced in 2013. It was before I lived in Edinburgh, but there was clearly an extensive period of consultation and engagement with the community to address serious concerns about litter and vermin. In order to preserve the streetscape in the new town and avoid adding to street clutter, it had been agreed that the goal-proof bags would be introduced on some streets. And these generally work well. They're on the pavement for less than 24 hours, and they do encourage personal responsibility for waste and recycling. And indeed, even in the council's own report, they showed that recycling rates are higher on those streets with recycling boxes than they are where communal bins are used. So, as I mentioned, not only has there been a lack of consultation, there's been also no heritage impact assessment, there's been no environmental impact assessment, nor any equalities assessment. None of these were performed before they even took the decision. The reasons that are quoted really just don't stand up for scrutiny, and we've issued a number of freedom of information requests which have just shown that the arguments that have been put forward are not supported by the facts. The local councillors and indeed the council themselves have had a lot of negative feedback on the way in which this change has been made, and indeed what the consequences will be for both the residents and the heritage of the World Heritage Site, which we are all proud of. We continue to lobby the council and the heritage bodies to pause the introduction of the changes to reconsider the decision. But I think, as Elspeth and Wendy have said, the concern we have is anybody actually listening to this and taking on board the views of the people that are living here. This is a residential area. It's where people live to a large extent. And we do need to make sure that whatever arrangements are here actually do the job properly. One of the things that surprised us is that the council has not taken a long-term view of this. They've basically responded to a situation without having a long-term strategic plan. There are many other World Heritage sites across Europe that are facing the same issues, but they have come up with a long-term plan. And it's that we feel should be put in place rather than a knee-jerk reaction of imposing a one-size-fits-all solution. I've rushed through it just to make sure I cover those points, but I just wanted to make the point that this is not something that just concerns a small number of people or a small number of streets in one part of the city. It does cover an extensive area of the city centre, and indeed has implications for areas out with the city centre. So thank you.
Thank you for doing that, and I apologise again that I haven't managed the meeting well enough to give everybody the time they wanted. But yeah, on this last point, there's a clear risk of a sort of rollout of what's deemed to be a successful solution, you know, that could affect other parts of the city. So I think there's plenty of food for thought there for all of us, whether working in the council or outside it. Can I ask any other business? And hopefully, if not, the next meeting is 1st of March, but as usual, that there is, if need, an opportunity to hold something in between times if issues arise. So again, apologise for letting it overrun by quarter of an hour. Thanks to everybody for your contributions, and look forward to seeing you again on the 1st of March. And Enjoy.
Thanks, Cliff. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Terry and DJ.
Merry Christmas again. Thank you, David, to your team as well.